thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you to Senator Balint for joining us especially. You know, this is, it's not too far back that we just completed another, I guess I'll call it unusual legislative session in Vermont, and in every state, I guess, or most states like this have been unusual. And we're really fortunate to have with us today Senator Becca Balint, the leader of the Senate, in her first session as leader of the Senate. So what a way to start out. And to give her an appropriate introduction to all of you and to get us rolling, I thought that I would just pass the virtual podium here to AVCU's advocacy point person, Adam Nekrasen. So Adam, it's all you.
Well, thank you, Joe, and nice to see you, Senator Balint. And of course, be your alter ego. I don't know if you can see I'm labeled.
I did.
Okay,
exactly.
I got a promotion. I'll fix that. So Senator Balint is a senator from Windham County, now serving as pro tem in the Senate, which is the leader of the Senate. In her life outside of politics, has a career as a teacher working in private schools, public schools, Community College of Vermont. We know Senator Balint from her years of work on the Economic Development Committee, and have seen you, Senator Balint, bring a real focus to Vermont's working people and vulnerable populations, and lots of advocacy for justice. Of course, you rose to be the pro tem, the leader of the Senate, right as the pandemic came upon us. And so that's a big challenge, and operating by Zoom and YouTube, I'm sure, it's been a challenge, but we really appreciate you spending time with our credit union leaders. As I know, from our time in the State House, credit unions are a nonprofit cooperative financial institutions, and the leaders here today have really been delivering essential services through the pandemic. And really, my colleague Jess Oski, who's here with me, has helped with Joe keep everybody on the front edge of the governor's orders, and it's been quite a ride, but we're here now, and we're looking forward to you telling us a little bit about the session, where we are, the high notes, and what's on your mind.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Adam. It's always great to see you and to see Jess. They do a great job at the State House. And good afternoon to everyone on the call. Before I tell you a little bit more about me, I thought I would tell you what I'm really excited about today. And I'm excited that we are about to hit 80% of Vermonters who are vaccinated. And this is just thrilling. We're about to get back together in community in a new way. And for an extrovert like myself, this is really great news. I do the job because I love people. I love conversations. I love thinking about ideas and policy, and it's going to be so much more fun to be doing that work in person again. And I'll talk more about the challenges of trying to legislate remotely towards the end. But that said, we had a very successful session despite doing our work remotely. And it is remarkable in many ways that we were able to pass a budget, pass massive amounts of ARPA funding. We also passed a smaller budget that was coronavirus relief funds. And we did all of that without being able to sit together in a room and hash things out. So I'm feeling very proud about that. The other thing that I should tell you right off the bat is that my parents opened credit union accounts for me and my siblings when we were kids. And we lived in upstate New York, and my dad was a lifelong member of the phone company there. And so he was a member of Capital Communications Federal Credit Union. So when we were little, we all got credit union accounts, and my very first car loan was through the Capcom FCU. And the credit union has been a huge part of my parents' lives for decades, looking at loans that they've gotten for work on their homes, all of their car loans. And I know that the work that you do, although similar in many ways to the work of our banks, it's much more community and family focused. And I really appreciate that about the work that you do. For those of you who don't know me, as Adam said, I'm Becca Balint. I do represent Windham County. I'm President Pro Tem of the Senate. Before I was Pro Tem, I served as Majority Leader in that chamber for 4 years. And I live in Brattleboro with my 2 kids and my spouse, who's a healthcare attorney. And I'm really happy to have this time with all of you to share some of my work and to hear your perspectives on what you see from where you sit in Vermont. And I like to tell people a little bit more about who I am and what I bring into my work, because I think it shapes who I am and how I go about doing my work in the Senate. So as Adam said, I am a former classroom teacher. I'm also a historian and a writer. I'm the child of an immigrant. I'm an avid outdoors woman. I'm also a motorcycle enthusiast, which some people think are at odds, but I actually think they're of the same part of me. And I'm also someone who came to this work in the Senate because of my deep concerns about issues related to poverty and education, economic development, and specifically workforce training and development. So my goal today, share some of the highlights of the session, reflect on what it was like to conduct business, and to hear your concerns, what you're hearing and seeing on the ground as we come out of this pandemic. So I want to make sure we save time for questions and comments and feedback for what are the things that we should be thinking about as we head into January. So the legislature and the governor were in alignment on many things and several broad spending priorities. So huge investments in housing, broadband build out, climate action, childcare support systems, business supports, specifically also geared towards small businesses. And we also had some disagreement with the governor on some aspects of his initial spending plan around the ARPA funds. So the ARPA funds, as they were initially passed by the federal government, were really geared towards investing in people. We know that because we can look at the language as it was crafted within the Congress. And that makes a lot of sense because most people think of government as investing in the services that directly impact and support people, thinking about human capital, thinking about workers. And we didn't really see that in the governor's initial proposals about how we should spend the ARPA dollars. They were almost entirely in his initial plan geared at bricks and mortar investments, which are of course incredibly important. But we knew that we'd have an infrastructure bill, knock on wood, coming soon in the fall. And we felt like some of the investments that we would make up front in the ARPA funds should be more directed at human capital because we would have those other funds later on for specifically on the bricks and mortar investments. So he did not have a lot of funding initially geared towards higher ed, the pension crisis, something near and dear to my heart, the workforce credentials and training programs. So this was concerning to us, especially we knew a lot of people were examining their workforce choices that they had as businesses shut down, organizations shut down. People had a little bit more time to think about, well, what do I want to do next? What do I want for my family? Where do I want to be 5, 10 years from now? What's that credential that I need to get myself there? And so we really wanted to come to agreement with him on investing more in Vermont State Colleges, more in some workforce development programs that we were directing not just towards incumbent workers, but also we know that there's this swath of kids, many of them young men who graduate from high school in Vermont and never go on to do any additional training or certification. So we tried to stay true to our values and the spirit of the initial goals of the ARPA federal package and use that money to really change the course of the pandemic in terms of safety, reopening, and focusing on communities and families with also immediate direct relief to respond to the COVID-19 emergency, to address the economic effects. So looking at support to households, individual workers, small businesses and nonprofits, and also in my neck of the woods, so Southern Vermont, the whole corridor from White River on down, the industry related to tourism and hospitality was incredibly hard hit and is still coming out of that right now as we look to this summer's wedding season and beyond. So we centered on people-focused recovery and relief, immediate relief to working families and small businesses, reopening schools safely. And we tried to stay focused on this question, which is who in our communities, who in the state has borne the brunt of the health emergency and the economic crisis? Because we often hear this sort of throwaway line, we're all in this together. And what we noticed, in fact, was that that was not true. Some people were much harder hit by this pandemic than others, some much harder hit by the economic crisis. So we really wanted to try to target the relief to those most acutely impacted. And I was thinking about this the other day and heard an interesting little tidbit on marketplace money that I just want to share with you. They were looking at PPP loans, who they went to, who got them, who didn't. And they looked at two neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And one was primarily Black-owned businesses and one was white-owned businesses. And in the majority white neighborhoods, 61% of businesses got PPP loans. But when you looked at majority Black neighborhoods, half of that number, 32%, were able to secure PPP loans. So many reasons for that. But of course, Los Angeles is not Vermont and vice versa. But we still have to do a similar kind of postmortem, looking at how relief dollars got spent in the first tranche that came through. Did we spend those dollars well? Did it go to the people who most needed it? Who was left out? So we're going to continue to revisit that work in January. And of course, as I hope there is another federal package related to infrastructure, really seeing, are we spending the money on those systems and people that need the money most? Or are there some businesses, some organizations that have been better served by the federal package? And how do we do this better going forward to tailor our spending decisions on this new landscape? So, decisions that we make within the legislature, impact individuals and families and small businesses across Vermont. And I know that you understand the reality of this. Some of you, I know, provide small business loans in your communities. The rest of you certainly make loans, as I said, to families around car loans, around home loans. And you understand that the last 15 months for Vermont has been full of a lot of anxiety for individuals and families around pocketbook issues, okay? So we tried to meet the needs of businesses through economic recovery grants, through micro business grants, through bridge grants to businesses with tax loss due to the pandemic, but also business technical assistance and outreach. We helped individual Vermonters with mortgage assistance and foreclosure prevention. We targeted additional money to those in our communities who take advantage of the Reach Up program. We invested more in the food banks and the Everyone Eats programs. And as I mentioned earlier, really looking at workforce upskilling, classes and training for recent graduates, adult training scholarships. I know that you all know there is a terrible, intense workforce crisis right now, and it's paired with a housing shortage. So we need more workers, but if we bring more workers here, there's the potential to exacerbate our already existing housing crisis. So these are the things that keep me up at night, because we have to address both of these in order to have a healthier economy. So as Adam said, I do serve on the Economic Development Committee. I'm currently the longest serving member on that committee. I find the material engaging and challenging. And it was the committee that I requested first and foremost. And I love that I'm still there. Even as pro tem, I get to serve on it in the morning, even though I'm constantly hopping in and out. But in that committee, we are supporting businesses and industries. We're looking at industries that have been around for a long time, and also some industries that are up and coming, like our microbrews and our distillers. But we try to protect consumers while also working to enhance business within our communities. So the session was like none other in that many of us were on Zoom for about 13 hours every day. And you can just imagine when you get to the end of the day and you're not sure if you actually made any impact, because you don't get that immediate feedback from the witnesses in the room and from each other. So some people felt very disconnected from the work that we do. I know it was challenging for advocates like Adam and Jessica on this call. I know it was hard for the press. From my neck of the woods in Windham County, it was actually a time when many more Vermonters felt connected to the legislature, because for us, it's a 2-hour drive up to Montpelier and 2-hour drive back, but over Zoom, people could sit and watch the Appropriations Committee and the Finance Committee and Economic Development Committee from home. And so we're going to really be looking to see how do we merge these two worlds as we open the State House back up, but still have avenues for people to stay connected in real time. So my job, I was likening it to a reporter the other day. My job this session was a lot like trying to keep a motorcycle up and moving forward without it tipping over. And there's just like for those of you who ride, there's this moment at which everything can all fall apart. And the game for me was just to keep everything moving forward, balanced enough so that we could actually get out and get some good work done for Vermonters. So I started my remarks by telling you, I do this job because I love people. I love my community. And I know that we have this in common. That's why you do the work that you do on behalf of Vermonters. So I want to thank you for supporting your communities. Thank you for enabling Vermonters across the state to fulfill dreams large and small, whether it's about owning that home or whether it's about buying that car or minivan that you need in order to get your kids to soccer. So we need community-minded businesses and nonprofits in our community. And I know that all of the folks on this call who run credit unions in your communities are huge assets to all of those families who need you for, as I said, dreams large and small. So I'm very excited to have some time here to take questions, comments, things that you want me to take back to my colleagues. And I will just turn it over to either Joe or Adam to help facilitate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I like my job very much too, because I learn something new every day. And what I learned today that I wasn't expecting to learn is that we could use the name Senator Becca Balint and motorcycle in the same sentence.
Yes.
I would have had no idea about that. So you mentioned, and Adam, I'm going to defer to you after this one question, but you mentioned about the contrast of different people's perspective about how your legislative session went this year. Yeah. And I think in the workplace for a lot of us, it's similar. There are pluses and minuses, of remote versus in-person and whatnot, going both ways. Yeah. Different people lean in different directions. But do you see, and I guess you kind of alluded to it, see that in January, it will be some conglomeration of both?
Yeah, so there's a number of committees working on this right now. As you can imagine, there's a lot of strong feelings about it. Our priorities are making sure the State House is open to the public and to the press, making sure the legislature is doing its work physically in the State House, and if not directly in the State House, there may be some committees that are in buildings that are adjacent to the State House, depending on airflow issues. The challenge for us will be trying to meet the needs of staff members who may not feel comfortable yet if they're immunocompromised, if they're not able to get vaccinated for some way. Will some staff members be working remotely? But we do know there has to be a method by which people who can't get to the State House can still watch what we're doing. So we're actually piloting some work with our IT folks this summer and fall to have some cameras that will swivel within the rooms to the person talking. So you won't necessarily have the Brady Bunch box, if you're watching at home, but you would be able to see the conversation as it's happening in real time. It is, I know, harder for some of the senators who've been there for a very long time to imagine us being live all the time, but we really cannot go back to having our sessions not be so accessible anymore. And so what that looks like within the Senate chamber or the House chamber is not really clear yet, because we've always had a live feed on VPR anyway. But we do anticipate that committee meetings will be streamed in some way in real time. And I think that's a plus. I really do.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
It's also a challenge for your colleagues included, because some of the out loud thinking, we work with interests that sometimes I'm working with someone who's a report to that works in other states, right? And they're like, wow, in Vermont, your senators, they just think out loud, in Albany, it's all prepared statements. And so we will see that change some. And you really experienced some of that as
I did.
Colleagues you have in senators, we believe in it to the core, found themselves tongue-tied and very,
Yes.
it's a change, I would say.
Oh, Adam, it is. And it is, that is, so two things related to that. We noticed within some committees too, that some senators and House members were really playing much more to the camera than to the conversation that was happening in the room. And that is that's not a positive at all. Or looking for the soundbite that will carry the day as opposed to really delving into the topic. And the other piece was, as you said, some thinking out loud, people, comments, some unfortunate comments, some not thought through all the way that went viral, which some taken out of context, some perhaps taken within context, but clearly showing people's age and experience. And that is going to continue to be a challenge for us. Absolutely.
Senator Balint, hi, I'm John Dwyer. We met before. I think the first time when we were actually in the State House for the legislative visit for the association. But if I could get you to spend a few minutes with us back on one of the topics, and I'll probably get you to both, but the workforce topic. I'm curious your perspective on some of what we hear as we try to hire people. I guess I'll start by confirming, if I could, for you, that our industry is no different than any other group you speak to. We are struggling to find staff, and everyone I speak to, in other credit unions and around town is facing that same issue. I mean, we have 22 openings, and we have a staff of 270 people. So we're hovering around 10% of our openings. But that's not a question. That's a frame for you. The question is really around, some of the statistics we've heard from from the state. Now, actually, I'm trying to remember, Joe, the gentleman from the labor economist.
Matt Barowitz.
Matt Barowitz.
If I'm right with his statistics, and some that are also from Art Wolf, who is my board chair, actually, Art's the chair of my board. So those statistics lead to the frame that there's about 30,000 fewer people in the workforce in Vermont right now than before the pandemic. And I'm curious your perspective on that, the Senate's perspective on that, perhaps the thinking around what has caused that drop. But your comment of housing, needing housing to bring people in, there are people here that aren't working anymore, according to those labor statistics. So I'm just curious about your back.
Yeah, so this is, Matt Barowitz spends a lot of time in my committee, as do many of the analysts at Joint Fiscal, trying to help us understand what's going on here. And obviously, I'm very, very sorry to hear about all the openings you have. I know that how challenging that is to be doing any kind of planning for the future when you already have such a hole right now. I know that many people have pointed out to us in the legislature that there are many, many women who are now out of the workforce that would like to be back in the workforce, if not for childcare. And, I didn't spend a lot of time on that, but that is also an area of focus for the legislature this year, is trying to figure out how do we enable everyone who wants to be back into the workforce to get there when we also have a shortage of childcare slots, across the state. And so that was certainly true for me. And my kids are now 10 and 14. And we've been working, 10 and 13. He's not 14 yet. I had to decide to drastically reduce my work and only worked part-time because of childcare concerns. And that is true for many of my friends. And I think what's hard is, as a culture, we haven't really shifted our thinking around the fact that there are many families in Vermont that only have one person who is heading the household, right? So if that person, especially in this pandemic, had to be responsible for also schooling children, then there is no one there to pick up the threads that are coming undone. And so I think a big part of this is a scarcity of childcare. I know Art Wolf has also mentioned in the past about some work that Joyce Manchester did at Joint Fiscal about how we do have, for some reason, a higher rate of people who are on disability when compared to other surrounding states. I don't know how much of that is related to our opioid crisis. It's definitely a question that I have, and there's also, I think, this other layer related to the opioid and fentanyl crisis, in that I see a lot of families who have of older people who would still be working if they could, but they are taking care of their kids because of the impact of the epidemic on their families. And so these are really uncomfortable topics to talk about. I feel like we're a little bit at ground zero here in Windham County, so I don't know how much my experience here in my community is reflected, statewide, but that's absolutely taking a toll. But I'd love to know what else you and your colleagues are hearing about why people aren't coming through the door to apply for those jobs.
Sorry, the mute thing.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar.
The sixth meeting today on Zoom. So
understood.
I think there's a couple of other factors. People are choosing to retire now. Yeah. That is one of the things we hear. You also have the overlay to the issues you framed with the additional unemployment benefits. How valid that is, I obviously can't confirm or frame other than.
Well, it's multi-factor. We know that.
Right.
Yeah.
But we do know that the long-term demographic challenges that have been spoken about in Vermont for many of us for a long time are coming to just fruition when you consider that drop in overall numbers of people in the workforce. It really exaggerates the impact on Vermont. But I can give you examples in Massachusetts that are saying, New Hampshire. Right. Obviously, it's not just the Vermont issue. It is multi-factor. I think the goal ultimately is that we have more people, to your point, who are able to fill the positions. Many of these are entry-level clerical and your typical banking positions that. Right. Some of the openings are because people were promoted into other jobs. 2/3 of our jobs are filled within. So it's so that's the good news. It's just trying to fill in when those dominoes stop. But
right, and I mean, one thing that I didn't mention too that has been a focus of mine for years, I think, having come from education, is really trying to pair up industry with education within supervisory unions, because I know I taught middle school, high school, and community college. I knew in middle school already I could already tell those kids who were going to graduate and probably not go on to do any kind of additional training. And we need to do a better job of hand-holding through the system so that they have a pathway to a career and aren't just, hanging around at home idle because they don't know how to take advantage of what's there. And so there's been a tremendous amount of overlap between the Education Committee and the Economic Development Committee to try to make those pathways more clear for families. And I wonder to what extent do you have a relationship with your local high school in order to get, as you said, many of them are entry-level jobs. Just curious about that kind of interplay.
We've done some of that with, we actually have focused over the last 5 or 10 years with CCV, Champlain College. We have a fair number of people that are in the first couple of years of school that will be our Saturday tellers, basically. They work for us on Saturdays and part-time during the week. So we try to retain as many of them as possible. But very appropriate point. There are more opportunities. I think it's, as you know, those take some lead time.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Everything right now, there's a little urgency in trying to solve the current state. But I appreciate the feedback. There are some options for us.
Yeah.
questions, comments, anybody? So one thing you made me think of, Senator, and,
Yeah.
and this is something that we brought up with Matt one week when
Mhm.
he was doing this sort of thing with us. We talked about, the greater, because of the pandemic over the past however many months it's been, the greater prominence and more acceptability and more expectation of a remote workforce.
Yeah.
And so, and I know the numbers today probably don't have much of a bearing on, the big picture.
Right.
But going forward, do you think that the greater acceptability of a remote workforce, people working for another employer but from their home in Vermont or vice versa,
Yeah.
is going to have much bearing or impact on, and I forget what the right name of it is, but programs like pay somebody $5,000 to come relocate to Vermont and things of that nature?
Right. Well, I do know, I was just meeting with, we hired a person finally to do our HR work in the legislature after many, many years of not having someone in that position. And I had a meeting with her last week when she did a survey of the staff within the State House and all the offices that support it. And she was saying, I need you to think really carefully about the fact, she was saying this to me and to the Speaker of the House, you're no longer just competing with other jobs within Vermont state government for attorneys, fiscal analysts. Now that they can work remote, the people here can now zoom in to another state house in another state. She said, so there, so it cuts both ways. You have the opportunity then, right, to attract other people who might work remote from another state or to relocate here for that reason. But we're gonna have some growing pains for sure. What we've heard from our legislative staff is most folks want to be working to some extent in community with each other. Whether it's 2 days a week, everybody needs to be in the office so that we're all on the same page kind of thing. But certainly looking at, for example, our attorneys, most of our attorneys are younger and have young kids, and the pandemic was incredibly challenging for them to juggle on the home front. So I think it is going to change the nature of work. And it's interesting that you brought up, Joe, the issue of the remote worker bill, because it was a real source of contention. It is it's a bill that has been appealing to some members of the Senate. The House has been dramatically opposed to it for a variety of policy reasons. But we'll be getting a study back related to, has it been on balance a positive financial impact to the state of Vermont to have the remote worker program? But I think many organizations and businesses are going to have to rethink the way the workplace looks going forward, because as you're saying, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, but you want to find that balance. I think most businesses and organizations are going to move towards a hybrid, and there's going to be more understanding of flexibility within, it goes to what we were talking about a few weeks ago within the Economic Development Committee. How can Vermont set itself apart as a place that supports families? And this is another way that we can do that, not just around childcare, not just around, first-time home buyer loans or mortgages, but how do we allow even state government to structure work differently so that families can make it work in a hybrid model? So I've been definitely singing this song for 5 years on how remote work is the work of the future. When I look at what my community members want, our 20-somethings, they want to be able to have some aspect of their work remote. So the pandemic made us do the thing that many businesses were resisting doing. So I tend to be a glass half full kind of person. So I'm actually kind of excited to see how we might be able to benefit from this. And it's definitely uncharted territory for a lot of organizations. And it feels, I know here in Windham County, on my street alone, like houses are selling like crazy at thousands of dollars above the asking price. And that is both exciting for my community and also scary. What does that mean to have an influx of people from out of state who actually may be coming here, buying workforce housing and actually working in another state, right? Not actually coming into our workforce. So it's challenging for sure.
Exactly.
I like it.
Kate?
Yeah, just very, very interesting. Thank you. There's so much to be said on all of these topics. I do think there's some claim that with regard to the workforce problem that people are lazy because they're getting assistance and they don't want to go back to work. And I just want to say, speaking for myself, I think that is so not true. I really don't see that. And I don't, I get kind of angry when I hear people say that. I was speaking with Lori Smith, the head of the Vermont Futures Project, who Joe would be a great speaker for this group at some point. And it's interesting. One of the pieces that they've identified is that there's so many single parent households in Vermont.
Yes.
And it's a tough thing to discuss because they're single for a reason, right? And you want to keep people protected from abusive partners, but yet the economic model doesn't always work with just one wage earner. And then you throw into that remote work where the children are at home for the remote worker, even if they're in school. And it's not the same job anymore that it was when someone was actually physically at a desk for 8 hours a day. Right. So it's I know we've seen a real drop off in some productivity for people who are single parents. We have an awful lot of staff that are single parents. Whether they have children or not, it is, I don't know how they've managed it for the last year.
I think there's been a mental health crisis in Vermont, quite frankly. I really, really do. And it is, I want to reiterate what you said. I am not seeing people who are lazy. I'm seeing people who are doing the best that they can under really, really challenging circumstances, and they don't know how to do it any other way. And so, I mean, so I have all kinds of advantages, and my kids are a little bit older, and my spouse has a job that makes enough money to support us. But I have to say, the three of us, so the two kids and me at home during this session, trying to legislate, my daughter's got a glockenspiel lesson in the next room. Like, I can't make this stuff up, right? And she's like banging away, and I'm trying to and I'm just thinking to myself, I have so many advantages and I can barely keep this going. And so I think it's easy for us often to blame it on other people's shortcomings or failures, as opposed to look at systems, because systems are so much harder to change, right? And so it sort of goes back to so down here in Brattleboro last night, we got a call late that the schools were going to close halfway through the day because it was going to be incredibly hot. And the schools don't have air conditioning, and many of them are brick buildings and they absorb the heat. And so last night, I thought my spouse, I thought she was going to pull her hair out, because she said, "What do you mean the kids are getting out at 11:30? And she just looked at me like, "You're going to pick them up, right? Because I can't do it." I was like, "I'm on it. I got it." But again, I have that advantage on so many levels, and we assume that families have two parents there that can pick up the slack for each other. And the other piece I wanted to mention, that is one of those other very hard things for us to talk about in Vermont, is that we have more kids in the custody of the state, in child welfare than per capita than any of our surrounding states. And we're trying to figure out why that is, because we don't have, we don't necessarily have a different, what am I trying to say? Well, if you look at the numbers and how we're impacted by the opioid crisis, okay, they're very similar to our surrounding states, and yet we still have so many more kids in state custody. And that also is impacting a generation of kids that we know that when they are, of course, foster parents are amazingly giving of themselves, but we know that is also having an impact on communities. And we're asking for some more information about why that is, but we don't know yet. Very confusing. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say one other thing. I think where a lot of this is going is toward higher wages. So John, to your observation about not being able to hire,
Yeah,
that I don't want to see us go there, but A, to get people in the door, B, to compete with potentially out-of-state employers if they can work remotely, and C, to pay for childcare or any other
right.
mental health, you use that term, any other challenge. I do think that's where we're headed in kind of a de facto way. Maybe not, I mean, certainly not legislated, but it's just going to have to happen.
Right, for competition with other people who want those workers. Yeah.
Other questions? Anybody?
Becca, this is Molly Dillon.
Molly.
I work at the state at the Department of Financial Regulation. Joe's nice enough to invite me to his
Hi,
meeting.
Molly.
But I have a quick question. When you were talking about, trying to figure out a hybrid version for the legislature, it made me wonder, do you have a network of state legislators across the country that share ideas about something like going forward?
Yeah, Molly, it's really a great question. We do, and there's a variety of organizations that we're in touch with. The thing that we realized, though, is we did something that really no other state was doing. We went fully remote really quickly, and most other states did not. And so we're kind of on the cutting edge, and which is kind of funny because, I mean, you're at the Department of Financial Regulation. There's a lot we could say about Vermont, but in terms of like IT stuff, cutting edge is not always the thing that comes to mind, but sorry, it's true. But our staff was amazing. And so we don't have a lot of people that can help us sort this through. We certainly are putting out those feelers through our organizations. But a lot of it, we're making it up as we go along. And it's one of the reasons why I feel so proud of the work that we did.
Well, thank you. I
Welcome.
meant to turn the video on when I talked, but thanks. It's very interesting that some problems are so similar across organizations and some are so different, as in your case.
Yeah.
And
Nice
we're anxious to see what the credit unions do in terms of when they want people to come in.
Right.
But we're going to be very hybrid, to go back. And maybe you've offhandedly heard the governor say that the last group he's going to worry about is state employees for figuring out coming back.
Yeah. Now I've been speaking with him and his staff about how that's all going to work, and hoping that the work that we do in opening the State House back up is mirroring a lot of the other work across state government, so it's not confusing for Vermonters.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Senator Balint, if I could just thread a few things briefly.
Thread away.
I think we're big boosters of the state government investing in IT and workforce training of your internal capacity, because when we have data breaches, and Governor Dean is in the news holding 10 unemployment checks that were fraudulently filed in his name, but data breach and financial identity theft is bad for the individual, and the credit union picks up the pieces. So, at the end of the line, you're looking at the faces where they're putting this all back together. But the one thing I would prompt you on, and this is really just a brief one, it's because when John Dwyer was talking about workforce development, I think these state leaders should know our state colleges are also struggling. And I know you mentioned it, and it's just a quick note, but I would want everybody to understand the severity of the crisis, and that but for COVID emergency dollars, we could have closed schools right now. It was that bad. And so that's the wrong direction, but
absolutely. And Adam, I'm so glad I did mention it quickly in passing, but I know for me, having come from teaching public school, I taught in 3 different public schools in Southern Vermont and at Community College of Vermont. And I know that a lot of these families who never, imagined that their kids would go to college, they send their kids to community college and Vermont state colleges. Those are not generally the families that send their kids to UVM. So it's critically important to me that Vermont State Colleges stays viable, because those students are not just looking for opportunity for themselves. They're looking for opportunities for their families and for their communities. And that's why we want to make sure we have a footprint still around the state in those communities.
Yeah, definitely.
Senator, could we just go back to housing for a second as well? We talked about, you talked about that in your introductory remarks. Just your thoughts on the impact of the federal funding on housing supply.
Yeah.
I'm kind of doing a tour and talking to a lot of people in, VHFA, et cetera, Maura Collins and others.
Yeah.
So just your perspective.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, we've made a huge, huge investment. And Adam, you can correct me, I think all told $190 million in housing investment, which is great. And it's new build, but it's also rehab. The thing that concerns me the most right now, actually, John, is as I watch the inflationary rate, I'm very concerned about the price of materials. And I am really concerned that the amount of units that we thought we were going to get from the investment is going to be drastically reduced because of the cost of supplies. And so I wish that I could tell you that we'll be, able to fully address the housing shortage. I don't think that's true. But the beauty of having such a sizable investment is it means that we can really spread the dollars around the state. It doesn't have to be just targeted in the Chittenden, Montpelier, sort of Franklin County area, where we're going to have funds that can then flow out to these housing organizations around the state. And, I am someone who didn't fully appreciate the extent to which, housing is an economic development driver. And I'm a complete and total believer now. And I think we've been able to bring along a lot of our colleagues within the House and Senate who didn't fully understand that either. And I'm just going to put in a little plug for sometimes sending a little bit, let's say, of people with a variety of experiences to the legislature. I'll put it that way. So I sat year after year in a committee trying to get through a down payment assistance program. And Maura Collins at that point was not heading VHFA, but she was there and coming in and talking to us about it. And, many of my colleagues, their houses are paid off. They're older Vermonters who paid off their loans, paid off their mortgage. And they kept saying, I don't think we need a down payment assistance program. Like, who's going to take advantage of this, right? And I said, I didn't buy my first house until I was almost 40. And even then, the only reason I could do it is because I married up. Like, oh my gosh, there is such a need. And every time we have continued to fund that program. And so I wish that I could tell you that it's going to meet the need. I don't think it is, but I think it's going to make a big difference in the lives of a lot of families. Adam, probably much more about some of the details because Adam works so closely with Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So definitely feel free to jump in.
Yeah, well said, and more to do. And
Yeah.
Fortunately, the shared priorities. It's interesting to see the Democrats in the legislature and the governor share in common these
Yes.
big American Rescue Plan Act priorities: affordable housing, climate action, broadband build out, water quality cleanup, jobs, the economy. And so we have a really good program to deliver those resources into housing units, but we are behind, and it's going to be tough. That's just the truth of it. John, I'm sorry, you just had both of us, and we came up with the same endpoint, which is like, we're going big, but it's hard.
I think it's certainly important, Senator Balint, to understand that the credit unions are a big part of housing. We are collectively some of the largest originators of mortgages and home equities, and every type of loan you can think of. We've had silent second programs for first-time home buyers. So we're ready I mean, we have people, we have programs. Kate leads an organization that really helps, hundreds of people every year get into homes. You've got credit unions all over the state that have similar programs. And if not, we share information. So, we're in it. We're in it more traditionally, to your point. We're, at least my credit union, but we're working to try to make sure we meet the needs of other people as well, or all people in the state. But I think there's a lot of optimism and there's a lot of concern at the same time, because your point about, inflation is real, and price inflation in real estate right now. Great for people to have a house that's worth 30 grand more, but the next one is worth 40 grand more. So it's, that's
absolutely. I know we gave up looking for a little bit bigger house in Brattleboro. We couldn't find it. And so we started, we renovated an attic room and a part of our basement, but the work's only half finished because COVID happened. And now we can't get a contractor because, everybody's doing, of course. And so we're just, our house is rather cluttered right now.
I think the frame you have of the affordable housing need is the right frame. It's we have 600 pre-approvals out there, hundreds of them with people that are trying to buy a house for 250 or 300, and the fact is one will come on the market in the next month.
That's right.
So that's really as eager as there are many groups, obviously. The HFA, CHT, obviously others. Credit unions are in that space, and will continue to be in that space to try to help people with that first-time home buyer position. That was just an awareness statement, I guess, if anything.
Yeah, no, that's great, because it's always important for you to amplify the parts of your work that are most important for me to be thinking about. And that was not one necessarily that was top of mind for me. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Senator, trying to working towards winding things down for you as we come up on the hour here. I don't know whether it's things that you think should have been, that didn't make it across the finish line at the end of this session. Or things that need to be revisited for some reason, or things that didn't get touched at all. But do you have a to-do list for yourself of goals for the next session when you reconvene?
Well, there are, I was just meeting with my chief of staff this morning about all the work task force that we have to appoint people to. And so I sort of see that last session as sort of framing up a lot of the work that we're going to have to finish when we come back. Certainly, I just touched briefly on the state pension system. That's a big one. That is a one that's important to me personally. I was a teacher. I understand, what the work is, what the job is. And, if we don't figure out that issue, we're going to be spending a tremendous amount of our general fund dollars to shore up the pensions long term. And so, we got to some, I guess, détente, I would say, with the governor in agreeing that we're going to have this task force, looking at not just the makeup of the investments and benefits, but also long-term having some, body overseeing the investment returns, because that was something that was not really something that as a legislature we had a close eye on. It goes back to where we are as a legislature. We are a citizen legislature, right? We're not full of people who are actuaries. We're not full of people who, necessarily have a financial background. And that's a beautiful thing in many ways, because we bring our frame to the State House and our communities and our families. But I really saw it in that conversation around how to crack that nut of shoring up the pensions, that as senators, we didn't necessarily have the education that we needed to tackle it in the short timeline that we had. So certainly work around that. The Vermont State Colleges, as Adam said, there's, long-term health of that. Really, we put together a package for bridge funding, but we're going to have to be revisiting that. And as I said, doing a little bit of a postmortem of the money that we targeted from the ARPA funds. Are we spending it, are we spending it right? Is it the right amount of money? And I know any infrastructure bill that comes down in the fall is going to require a lot of attention. So no shortage of work to do. Good thing I love my job.
Good thing. It doesn't sound like there's a shortage of things to do.
Yeah.
But you did a great job in this session, and so congratulations on your first session in your role.
Really appreciate that.
And thank you so much for the time that you were able to spend with us today. We really appreciate it. It's been very interesting and informative, and we enjoy your conversation with you and your insights.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
And
everybody,
thank you to
stay hydrated is what I was going to say.
Hydrated and cool. And thank you to everyone else for joining us in the session today. Reminder, this time slot next week, we'll be chatting with Commissioner Levine and Commissioner Pichek, and they're no strangers to any of us here. So I look forward to that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Senator.
Have a good week.
Thank you, Joe.